Today's video is going to compare the Sony ZV-E10 to the Sony ZV-E1, comparing APS-C to full frame cameras, which is going to be the best for content creators. Gotta say, we've got a bit of a janky rig today. We have got a friction arm and a clamp from Small Rig, and this thing is so heavy. But let's get going on the stabilization tests here between the Sony ZV-E10 and the Sony ZV-E1. Walking kind of like that ninja monkey walk. So we're trying to keep things as steady as possible as we move forward here. And I know stabilization is a thing that irks everybody and it can make or break video. So for complete equalness, both of these cameras are on active steady shot. Sony ZV-E10 is on active steady shot, as is the Sony ZV-E1. Now we know the Sony ZV-E1 is dynamic stabilization, but it wouldn't be a like for like comparison, so let's forget about that. But this is what active stabilization looks like on both of these cameras, and just even from a walking and talking perspective, which if you're a creator in vlogging, this is what, look at this guy's vlog. Yeah, this is kind of how the whole thing is going to move. Now obviously rolling shutter is another thing. Let's just do a pan from left to right, and we can see or not see the rolling shutter. ZV-E1 has the faster readout sensor here, so let's go really fast, and you can see complete rolling shutter comparison. And to get a better idea as well, keep an eye on the poles here, so you can actually see these poles are bars. When they're moving, oh man. To have reliable autofocus, it's something that every content creator needs, because especially you're out and about. So right now, both of these cameras, from what I can see, have absolutely pinpointed me in focus. Let's go down here and see what happens. Am I in focus on the Sony ZV-E10? Am I in focus on the Sony ZV-E1? I gotta say though, when it comes to the Sony ZV-E1, I feel it's just that little bit snappier on the autofocus, and from the last couple of weeks that I've been using the camera, it's incredibly reliable. Now, Sony ZV-E1 has insane autofocus as well. Really reliable, really good. But every time I come here, there's a train. Oh man, these things are heavy. Now, when it comes to the settings on both of these, I've reset both cameras to factory settings, and all I've done is I've dialed in my shutter speed, because this camera and this camera is set on shutter priority, so it's 1/50. The ISO is on auto, the aperture is on auto, and the setting for the picture profile is off. No S-Cine tone, no S-Log3. This is what it looks like right out of the box when you get your camera. And it you gotta say it looks pretty damn good. But from a color perspective, which one has slightly better color, even directly out of the box? Or are these sensors exactly alike? Here's your standard old Irish green field, as it were. So this is what it looks like. No picture profile on the settings. And also for the settings, by the way, audio is on the onboard mic on all of these. This is what it sounds like talking directly above the camera as I start going back down here, and I've got the furry kittens on top of each one. If I'm really honest, I hate the furry kitten, the dead kitten on the ZV-E1. It's just like, I don't know, just, yeah, Sony ZV-E10 definitely has better hair. So the lens that are on both of these cameras today, I've got a Viltrox 24mm 1.8 on the Sony ZV-E1, and I've got the Sigma 16mm 1.4 on the Sony ZV-E10. Now with the 1.5 crop, it's 24mm, so they're kind of both equal, but you get an idea of that APS-C crop versus the actual Sony ZV-E1 full frame, no crop. And right now I am stretching my hand out as far as I can, so there is quite a difference between APS-C and full frame. These two cameras might look slightly similar, but there is a significant difference between the two, and photographers may or may not notice the difference. The Sony ZV-E10 is a 24 megapixel camera, and the Sony ZV-E1 is just a paltry 12 megapixel camera. Now there's all kinds of arguments around pixel binning, and 12 megapixels, they're bigger pixels, so they take in more light, so technically can be better in low light, and all of that argument aside, but the big difference between 24 megapixel and 12 megapixel in a lot of cases, besides the light argument, is that you can actually crop in a lot more on the Sony ZV-E10 when it comes to photography. Now, that might force you, if you're using the ZV-E1 for photography, just to frame your shots a little bit better. But either way, quality out of these from a photo perspective is pretty banging. Any content creator, image quality is probably the biggest deal breaker. If you're shooting stuff for TikTok, my arm is collapsing. If you're shooting stuff for TikTok, Instagram, or whatever, image quality for any camera can be the deal breaker. But for me, and I think for a lot of folks out there, image quality is not the deal breaker between the Sony ZV-E10 and the Sony ZV-E1. Here's the thing. Image quality is negligible between the two. Obviously, the full frame look and APS-C look, most of people's audiences won't really care. So depending on the look you're going for, that's probably not going to be a deal breaker in a lot of cases. But the huge, big deal breaker for me on using these two cameras when you're going back to back is the functionality. I gotta say, the menu system on the Sony ZV-E10 is antiquated. I know, look, I'm somebody who uses Sony cameras every single day. I've used Sony cameras way back since the RX100V and their old digital CyberShot line, so I'm used to the menus and I know my way around the menus. It was going from the Sony ZV-E10 to the Sony ZV-E1 that the functionality on the Sony ZV-E1 and that newer menu system, which I use all the time in the FX3 as well, it was a night and day difference. Genuinely, it took me half the time to get what I want and change what I want on the Sony ZV-E1 compared to the Sony ZV-E10. And I feel that's definitely going to be one of the big deal breakers for people. Menu systems by default are complicated, they're complex, and they can be cumbersome. And it's probably only now that I really kind of get the hate for the Sony menus, the old Sony menus, which have been on a lot of their APS-C. Actually, they've been on all their APS-C line. Obviously, the FX30 doesn't have it. So when it comes to this scenario, functionality, speed, efficiency, especially for a content creator camera, is going to be paramount. Now, as somebody who's been using and knows his way around the old Sony menu systems, there's no comparison. Now, that's where the comparison kind of dies and ends essentially, because the price difference between the two of these cameras is astronomically different. You're looking at hundreds for the ZV-E10, you're looking at thousands for the ZV-E1. If I were to buy one of these cameras for purely content creation, I would really consider Sony ZV-E1 on the grounds that eventually you're probably going to end up on that camera anyway, versus the Sony ZV-E10, which probably as a content creator, if you're moving around, the stabilization is awful. It's a very old sensor. It's back since, like, I don't know, the 6300. The sensor that's on the ZV-E10 is really, really old. Ooh, longest move streak. You are investing into old technology, which has got new software. The autofocus is really, really good and all of that, but is that going to be enough? If you buy a gimbal, right? If you buy a gimbal and the Sony ZV-E10, it's still going to be a lot cheaper than the Sony ZV-E1. I love the Sony ZV-E10, it's great, but if I were to buy one, I would beg, borrow and steal and save and just wait a little bit longer to go for something like the Sony ZV-E1, because the settings functionality alone on it makes it leaps and bounds ahead of the other camera. Now, if you are willing to get over that, and obviously it's a couple of $1,000 in the difference here to just get over some cumbersome menus, then that's fine. But will you end up here eventually on the Sony ZV-E1? And if you do, by the way, video here to take you through all the epic settings that you really should be changing as soon as you get the camera.